Imagine walking through the streets of Constantinople in the spring of 542 CE. The scent of the sea is gone, replaced by something far heavier, the unmistakable stench of decay. Bodies line the alleyways, some covered in hurriedly thrown cloth, others left as they fell. The city that once echoed with the noise of merchants and priests now hums with the low, constant moan of the sick. The Byzantine Empire, under Emperor Justinian I, stood at the height of its power, a realm of grand architecture, thriving trade, and military ambition. But none of that mattered when the ships came. They carried grain from Egypt, yes, but also something unseen. Stowaways in the form of black rats, their fleas infected with a deadly bacterium we now call Yersinia pestis. At first, it was just whispers, a few unexplained deaths in the port district. But within days, the disease had seeped into every corner of the city. Fever, chills, and swelling lymph nodes the size of eggs appeared in thousands. Victims slipped into delirium, many unable to rise from where they had collapsed. Within a week, whole households were gone. Contemporary accounts, like those of the historian Procopius, describe corpses piling up faster than they could be buried. Officials ran out of places to put the dead. Some bodies were stacked in open courtyards, others were tossed into the sea. It was said that at the height of the plague, thousands died each day, a figure that emptied neighborhoods in less than a week. If you're just joining us, we're about to trace not only the origins of one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, but also how it reshaped the very course of European and Mediterranean civilization. If history that uncovers the raw, unfiltered truth interests you, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss the next story history tried to bury. Because as you're about to see, the Plague of Justinian wasn't just a health crisis. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that would weaken empires, alter economies, and change the balance of power for centuries. And in the next section, we'll step back and uncover exactly where this plague came from, and why it spread with such terrifying speed. Long before the plague ships reached Constantinople, its journey had already begun thousands of miles away. The most widely accepted evidence points to the arid steppes of Central Asia, where Yersinia pestis had been circulating among rodent populations for centuries. Caravan routes and trading paths linked these remote regions to bustling cities across the known world. When the Byzantine Empire expanded its reach into new territories, it also inherited invisible passengers. By the early 540s, the disease had followed grain shipments along the Nile River, reaching the busy Egyptian port of Pelusium. From there, it fanned out in two directions: westward toward Alexandria, the empire's breadbasket, and eastward toward Palestine and Syria. The critical turning point came when the plague boarded ships bound for Constantinople, the empire's beating heart. The city's strategic location made it one of the busiest ports on Earth. Every day, vessels arrived from Africa, Asia, and Europe, unloading not only goods but rats and their flea-borne plague bacteria. Once ashore, the infection spread quickly, aided by dense urban housing and limited sanitation. Fleas, seeking new hosts after their rodent carriers died, bit humans, transmitting the deadly pathogen directly into their blood. Within weeks of its arrival in the spring of 542 CE, the plague had transformed Constantinople from a hub of trade into a city under siege by disease. But the devastation was not contained there. Coastal shipping routes carried the plague west to Greece and Italy, and east to the Persian Empire. Soldiers, traders, and refugees became unknowing carriers, taking the infection far inland. What made the spread so relentless was the perfect storm of geography, trade, and population density. Unlike later pandemics, the Plague of Justinian struck an interconnected world where a single ship could infect multiple ports in quick succession. And unlike modern times, there were no quarantine measures, no understanding of germs, and no medical tools to slow its march. Historians estimate that within a year, the plague had reached every major Byzantine territory and beyond, from the Mediterranean islands to the Arabian Peninsula. It became not just an outbreak but a pandemic, a killer that recognized no borders, no armies, and no treaties. In the next section, we'll see how this invisible enemy didn't just kill people, it nearly broke an empire. We'll uncover how Emperor Justinian himself was struck down, and how the Byzantine state struggled to function as the death toll climbed to unimaginable heights. By the summer of 542 CE, Constantinople had become a city of silence. Markets were empty, workshops abandoned, and the clatter of commerce replaced by the creak of funeral carts. The plague's death toll was so high that essential services collapsed. Grain shipments rotted in warehouses because there were no dockworkers to unload them. Construction projects stopped midway. Even the empire's armies, the pride of Justinian's reign, found their ranks halved in weeks. The historian Procopius recorded that the city lost as many as 10,000 people per day at the height of the outbreak, though modern scholars caution that exact figures are impossible to verify. Still, the effect was undeniable. Entire neighborhoods emptied overnight. Those who survived often avoided the sick entirely, leaving loved ones to die alone, too afraid to risk infection. The political consequences were just as severe. Emperor Justinian himself fell ill, though he eventually recovered. His temporary absence from power created uncertainty in a time when the empire was engaged in wars on multiple fronts. With soldiers dying from disease faster than they could be replaced, the Byzantines were forced to halt or delay military campaigns, particularly in Italy, where they had been fighting to reclaim territory from the Ostrogoths. Economically, the plague was a disaster without precedent. Trade slowed to a crawl, agricultural production plummeted, and tax revenues collapsed. The Byzantine state relied heavily on its population for labor and military service, and with so many dead, both the treasury and the army suffered. Inflation followed, as the scarcity of workers drove wages up while food prices soared. Socially, the fabric of urban life frayed. Religious processions filled the streets as people sought divine intervention, while others blamed outsiders or divine punishment for the catastrophe. The fear was not only of death but of what would come after: famine, invasion, and the loss of imperial dominance. The plague didn't simply kill, it undermined the very foundation of Justinian's ambitions. His grand project of restoring the glory of the Roman Empire was slowed, and in some areas, permanently derailed. Though the empire would endure for centuries, its golden age had been dealt a wound from which it would never fully recover. In the final section, we'll see how the Plague of Justinian didn't just vanish after its first strike. Instead, it became a recurring visitor, reshaping the medieval world for 200 years and leaving lessons we still find relevant today. When the first wave of the Plague of Justinian finally subsided around 544 CE, the survivors must have believed the worst was over. But history records a cruel truth: this was not a one-time disaster. The plague returned again and again, in smaller but still deadly waves for nearly 2 centuries. Outbreaks are documented as late as the mid-8th century, striking the Byzantine Empire roughly every 8 to 12 years. The repeated blows meant the empire could never fully recover its pre-542 strength. Each resurgence killed tens of thousands more, thinning the labor force and draining the treasury. Border defenses weakened, allowing new threats to emerge. The Lombards pushed into Italy, the Persians regained ground in the east, and later the expanding Islamic Caliphate would take advantage of a still recovering empire. The long-term demographic impact was staggering. Modern estimates suggest the initial outbreak may have killed between 25 to 50 million people across the Mediterranean world, possibly a quarter of the population. While these numbers are reconstructed from fragmentary sources and remain debated, the consensus is clear: the Plague of Justinian ranks among the most lethal pandemics in human history. Its economic effects rippled outward for generations. Cities shrank, farmland was abandoned, and trade networks contracted. The Mediterranean, once a thriving hub of cultural and commercial exchange, entered a period of stagnation. For many historians, this pandemic marks a turning point between the classical and medieval worlds, a moment when the dream of a restored Roman Empire finally slipped out of reach. There are also lessons here that feel eerily modern. The speed of the plague spread along trade routes mirrors the way diseases travel in our globalized world. Its cycles of resurgence remind us that pandemics rarely follow a single, predictable wave. And its political consequences show how health crises can shift the balance of power in ways no army could achieve. By the time the Plague of Justinian faded from memory, it had reshaped the course of European, Middle Eastern, and North African history. The great ambitions of Emperor Justinian lived on in his buildings, like the Hagia Sophia, but his dream of a united Roman Mediterranean was gone, buried alongside millions of his subjects. If you've stayed with us through this journey, you've seen how a microscopic bacterium altered the fate of empires. History is full of moments like this, quiet killers with loud consequences. To explore more of them, make sure you're subscribed, and join us for the next chapter in the story's history tried to forget.